Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today I'm going to have the opportunity to work on a Spinfisher V 3500. This was sent in by Rennie, one of our viewers, and he said, you know, the reels are just sticky. And I worked on a 4500 earlier, and that one was an interesting problem. So if you have a problem with the pickup where you just start to turn and it sticks, well, go watch that video because, well, it was a rather unique start. But this one's a 3500, it's a little bit smaller format. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pieces off the exterior. That includes the spool and the handle and the like. We'll get underneath, we'll show you how the reel is made, how to take it apart, how to service it, and of course how to put it back together again and keep it fishing. My guess is, based on the other reel that I saw, that this reel is going to be sticky because it's got a lot of dried grease and dirt. That the reel did appear to be used in this salt water, and it also appeared to be used in a sandy situation, the other one, and I suppose that this is going to be the same. So I took the spool off, and when I did, I oiled the two joints of the bail arm. You do not need to remove a bail arm during a service unless the bail is not working. So test while you have the opportunity. If it's working, all you need to do is to work some penetrating oil or just regular oil if you don't have the penetrating oil. Flip it a couple of times, make sure that it operates smoothly, and if it does, leave it alone. I get a lot of reels that come in here with broken bails, not because the bails broke, but because the owner was starting some service on it, decided to take the bail off, and didn't know how to put it back together again. That keeps me busy, but let's not keep you busy. Leave it there unless it needs to be serviced. All right, the general idea of a service is to take a reel apart, then to inspect the pieces and parts, clean up any dirt, re-lube, and then get it going fishing again. So that's what we'll be doing on this one. Now I'm going to start by taking off the bottom part of the case. If you're servicing a reel, not just this reel, but any reel, and you notice that the case is separate here underneath the rotor, well, you can go ahead and do exactly what I'm doing. Remove the case screws and that case should come off. If you notice that it tucks up under the rotor here, well, then you're going to have to take the rotor off. And to do the rotor removal, you're going to remove the washers that sit on the axle shaft. That'll give you the access to the rotor nut. You're going to remove the little holdfast. Remove the rotor nut, pull the rotor off, and then you can come back and remove that side plate. But in this case, that side plate is not tucked under, so you don't need to do that. So I've pulled the 4 case screws. I'm putting them into a parts tray. My parts tray is just a fast food container. But I'm putting them in one spot so that I know where to find them when it's time to reassemble. And I'm also putting them there because I want to check the size of those screws, make sure they're all the same size. If they're not the same size, then you got to note which hole had the smaller screw. And don't think that it's too unusual to find smaller pieces in there. All right, with that you can remove the side plate. Looks like we have the original grease. And this is the part that failed on the other reel, this little bushing here that rides on a stud and is screwed in. Well, that little bushing seized up onto the crosswind block. So if you have one of these reels, it's important to note that, and it's also important to note that you should remove it, clean it, and put it back in its place. Now, the first time that was a problem for me, boy, I just couldn't figure it out at all, because you don't think that something like that will fail. And we had a very erratic ride. It would go up and it would kind of wump. Well, that's because that fell out of round. This time around with the 4500, what we found out was that the unit was in place, but it seized. It wasn't rolling. That's a little roller. And we'll show you the operation of that as we take this apart. But it was a little roller. It got seized on here with some salt or debris or corrosion or whatever may have caused it. And as you started, well, you were trying to overcome some inertia by rolling a roller that wasn't cooperating with you. I've removed the 2 screws from the crosswind block. I'm going to hold the block now and pull the axle out. When you're pulling that axle out, make sure you feel that it's a nice, even and fluid ride up the channel through that pinion gear there. If you have any resistance at all, that axle shaft may be bent, and if that axle shaft is bent, it probably needs to be replaced. Once you do that, then you can pull the main gear out, and we can see just a lot of old dirt and grease that's been hanging around for a while, and that's part of it. You want to inspect the teeth. Make sure all the teeth on the inner gear as well as the outer gear are uniform and not chipped, broken, or cracked. Now we're going to remove that crosswind gear. I'm going to put that right on the table there so I can show you what happened on the other one. And then we're going to pull this out. And this one, sometimes it's an easy one, sometimes it's not. It is a Phillips head screw holding in the crosswind gear. So take that out. That's going to go in my parts tray. We're going to do the same thing. Oh, I thought it was going in my parts tray. It stuck to me. How do you like that? Now it's in the parts tray. And we're going to pull the gear out as well. And those pieces all need to be cleaned and taken care of. So let's just go put the body aside for a moment. Just lay that over here. And I'll show you what we were doing. So the first thing you want to do is clean that main gear, get the old grease out. There's hardly any grease in the teeth right now. So that would tell you that that would be a cause for this reel acting sluggishly, is that it's metal on metal, it's not sliding, and it's causing it to behave poorly. I'm going to take the main gear, I'm going to take a hard bristle brush, and I'm just working my way through the teeth. I'm doing that for two reasons. The first is that I want to make sure that the teeth are uniform, and the second, I want to make sure that if there's anything jammed up in those teeth, that it gets removed. In this case, that's worked fine. Remove the bearing from this side. Notice underneath there's two shims on that bearing, and that's put in at the plant to help take up any variances in the manufacturing tolerances. So make sure you put those back on when you go to reinstall. Now these are shielded but not sealed bearings, so you can put oil in there, let it seep in. We're just going to put that over in the case, let that work in there. I'm going to put the main gear in there. I'm going to clean off that crosswind gear. And this is a good time to tell you, if you like these kinds of videos, if you're into the hobby of reel repair, or you're just trying to service one reel in particular, or maybe you're thinking of buying a reel, then subscribe to my channel. I work on all kinds of reels, and I would ask you to subscribe. That way you'll see the reels that come into my shop for service. We generally do work like this, where we will have a conversation about what the reel is, how it's made, what its purposes are, and the like, as we go about doing the service of the reel. And you'll get to learn a little bit more and enhance your knowledge of fishing reels and how to service them. And all you have to do is hit that notification button. You'll see everything I post, and I post all kinds of fishing reels. And if you find one that you like, well, go watch it. That's what this is kind of all about. Here's that troublesome crosswind block then. There is a little bushing here. This one's spinning fine, but let's just go ahead and show you what I did on the other one anyway, because it's kind of irksome. I'm going to call this one maybe a design defect. There's a screw that holds this in. I'll put that right there. And then there's this little wheel. It's a bushing, it's not a bearing. And what happened on the other one was all kinds of salt and the like got jammed up in this little collar here. And that caused the stickiness with that bushing, and that stickiness translated into a stick when you first tried to start up the crank of the reel. That's understandable, but it's kind of an unusual one. I wasn't looking for that or expecting that, but that's what the problem on that reel was. And that's why I did the video there showing, well, an unusual issue with this particular type of reel. So I've cleaned it up, I've re-greased it, I put it back in. That should ride nicely up and down inside the case. Clean up the back side of the reel as well. There's a slot here in that crosswind block. Make sure that you clean that out of the old grease before you put the new grease in. And we'll just set that aside as well. And let's go up top then. Let's take off the rotor. Let's take off the bearing pack and make sure all of that is clean as well. So just going to put these off to the side so I don't knock them around. I have a habit of kind of swinging things, trying to keep them in camera angle and so on. And every now and then, unfortunately, I knock something and kind of learn, get it out of the way and kind of avoid the problem. That's your tie-down collar. Now we have, I believe this is a 12mm nut. I'm going to use an old Mitchell tool. You might be able to grab that with an open-end wrench or a box wrench. Maybe not. The lip may be too high. Switch over to a ratchet then, and go ahead and use that ratchet to break the nut. And then you can generally walk that nut off just by backing it off. This nut comes off in a standard direction, so not a big deal in terms of anything funny going on there. Then you can remove the rotor. Underneath the rotor you have a rather standard drag stack. This one is pretty much common across the Penn line now from a design standpoint. So if you're opening up a Pursuit, a Fierce, or a Battle, or a Spinfisher, you're pretty much going to find this pinion gear, an anti-reverse setup. It just kind of is the way it is. Now it may look a little bit different between the reels, but for the most part you should find a minimum of 1 and probably 2 bearings. You'll find the anti-reverse clutch and collar, and you'll find a little carrier for the top bearing. So if you work on this one, you can work on a Battle. The crosswind blocks and the like will be different, but the Battle, Fierce, and Pursuit lines are all kind of the same up top, and that'll give you confidence if you're working on one to go work on the others. I'm doing the same thing here that I did with the other one. I'm taking the 3 screws out that hold that little tie down, and with those 3 screws I want to make sure that they're all the same length, and then I'm going to just put them in that cover there because we're all going to go right back in. Here's the cap, then we want to pull that off, and hopefully we'll be able to pull this assembly out. And right now Chris is going, your streak continues. Well, it doesn't continue, Chris. I lost one along the way, and such is life. I was unable to remove one of the main stacks that I was working on a classic reel the other day. And my advice to you, if you're working on a classic reel and you can't get that bearing and axle shaft out of there, and the bearing is not an issue, the bearing is performing fine, don't take the risk of breaking a part that you may not be able to get replaced. Rather just give it a good cleaning and re-oil, re-lube, and kind of know that you did the best you could given the circumstances. We have a bearing in the back here. I just cleaned the case. We're going to oil that bearing. I'm using fishing reel oil. Please use a fishing reel oil. Notice the stack then, and again this stack is very similar. This collar is a little bit different on the Fierce and that, but it's pretty much the same setup. You have a bearing inside of a collar, and that bearing faces up. You should have a little washer on there. Yep, you have a little washer on top of that bearing. Don't lose it. If you lose that and you've got to put this on, you're going to find a very rough running rotor. Say that 3 times fast. Here's your anti-reverse clutch and collar. Those are 2 separate pieces. Don't be afraid of them. This is your bottom bearing. And then your bottom bearing has a shield underneath that as well, or a little friction washer there. So time to clean it up. This is where dirt can hide. So do the same thing we did with the main gear. Take a soft brush, clean out the channels and inspect them to make sure that they're all good. They are. So I'm going to take my brush, put a fresh coat of grease onto the channels, the gear teeth here. Get a little bit onto the stem here, which is going to ride inside the holder. That, again, you have a small collar there. Don't forget about that one. If you don't put that one on, the bearing may jam up on the teeth below. Bearing goes on. This is your anti-reverse clutch. Sometimes it's called a bearing. Most of the time it's called a clutch, but it seems to be counted all the time as a bearing, so we'll call it a bearing, or a bearing clutch. This is your collar. I'm just going to clean the old grease off of the outside. These do not get oiled. This is a friction-driven device. And if you don't have the friction, well, these little rollers inside here are not going to grab the sleeve. So make sure that you clean it up of the excess oils. Same thing on the exterior of the sleeve. Clean it up, and then you can just install the clutch. Two sides to this anti-reverse clutch. There's a side that has a Teflon coating to it, or a plastic coating, and there's a shiny side. This is a good time to tell you, if you haven't been doing this all along, take pictures as you're disassembling pieces. I'm doing it with the video, but this is a case where you can get in trouble. If you put that white side up, you're not going to have an anti-reverse. You're going to have a reel that won't reel. You'll try to turn it forward and it won't be able to turn. The plastic side belongs down over that collar. So we'll go ahead and install that now. Now you have the sealed bearing, so you don't need to oil that. It's all sealed up. You have a collar. Notice on the bottom you have a smaller diameter than the top. This is a cradle for that bearing. Put the bearing in, and this is where you took pictures. You notice that the bearing was facing up. You need that. There's an offset below, and as you'll notice on the collar for the anti-reverse, that's proud of the anti-reverse. It's sitting up, so you need that extra space on this side to do that the right way. And then don't forget the rotor shim. Alright, so that takes care of this portion of the reel. Just going to get that last shim washer in, and we're just going to go reinstall now. So again, a lot of what you're doing here is inspecting, cleaning, and then reassembling. Alright, just going to check underneath, make sure that the rotor is clean. There's a little trip lever here. It doesn't hurt to get some oil on that. Use fishing reel oil. You can work it in a little bit. Make sure that that's clean and not dirty. It won't work very well if it's got dirt on it or if it's jammed up in there. Now we can go ahead and put the rotor back on. This nut came off in a traditional sense, counterclockwise, or winding towards you, and it goes back on the same way, except just looking over here on my table, I forgot the tie down. So let's go back and put that tie down on. That's a case where it just fooled me. Normally I'll put that into my parts tray. I'll take a glance and I'll notice it's there. This time around I decided to keep it on the table, and well, there you go. I'm a creature of habit, and that habit almost hurt me there. Alright, well, we would have noticed it eventually. I would have gone and try and put the case on and noticed that those pieces were over there. Something in the back of my mind just told me that wasn't complete before I put the rotor on. Alright, there's 3 of these. The plant uses a cold Loctite here, the blue, and I get that question a lot. Should I use Loctite on my screws? I generally do not recommend that, only because if you wind up with a screw that locks in and you strip that screw, well, you can't service your reel any longer. And that usually happens on the conventional reels, like a Jig Master or a Squall or a Fathom or something like that. Somebody wants to not have those screws become loose because of the vibration on boats, and they go ahead and use the Loctite, and then the next thing you know, you can't get the screw out and the reel can't be serviced. Now, I guess you can't blame Loctite. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It locks the screws in place, but at the expense of not being able to go ahead and service your reel. I think that's a bad trade-off. If you service your reels on a regular basis, which is about a 1-year stint in between, you don't have to worry about those screws coming loose in one season. It rarely happens, but it does happen, so be aware of it. Alright, now we can put that nut back on. I'm going to go ahead and grab that 12mm tool. Notice that if you're working on a Spinfisher that was made in the United States, that's not a 12mm nut, and just be aware of that. You give it a spin, make sure that it's doing what it should be doing, and it certainly is. You can test the bail at this point if you want as well. Let's It's a nice smooth operating reel there. All right, come on down to the bottom of this reel then. We greased up our crosswind gear, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Put that back in place. Next up, we've cleaned, but we haven't greased our main gear, so we're going to go ahead and do that. So if you have a question on this reel or any reel in particular, and maybe you're working on a reel, maybe you're stumped, maybe you did something, you can't find out what the issue is, then by all means leave a note in the question section of this, the comment section. I'll be happy to come back to you if I know the answer, and if I don't know the answer, I'll try and point you to somebody who may know the answer, but I'll try and help you out there. Just do it in the comment section. All right, that's got that little bush in there, so I'm going to put a little bit of grease into the channel on that side. We've loaded the crosswind block, and note that that stud on the crosswind gear is all the way down low. You have to do that to clear the main gear. We've greased up the main gear. We're going to go ahead and insert that into there now. And in case I didn't say before, the blue grease I'm using is a Penn Precision reel grease, and I would just recommend that you use a fishing reel grease when you go to maintain your fishing reels. I've opened up a lot of reels recently and have had all kinds of greases in there, and they just bog down a reel over time. They're not designed for marine performance, and over time they dry out, they evaporate, they do other things that limit the performance of that grease. So please use a fishing reel grease when you do service your reels. I just inserted the axle shaft through the pinion gear. I'm going into my parts tray now to pull those two screws. These are small screws. If I get stuck, well, you know the story with me and small screws. I just have a tendency to not do small screws very well. I guess big hands and small screws don't get along. I do use a little dab of that fishing reel grease to kind of hold that screw in place while I try to center it up. And I'm using a micro driver. It's a very small access point there for that screw. All right, that's on. I noticed that I made a mistake, but in this case I'll be all right. I didn't put the tie down into the rotor ahead of that, but this can fit over that if I remember. So I think we're just going to get lucky here putting that over. And we are. Sometimes you just get lucky. There's two screw sets in here, depending on where that point lands. There you go. I have one of them. Doesn't matter which one goes where. We have this broad screw that's going to tie that down. And that's going to stop that that rotor nut from coming loose. We were just talking about that with the vibration of a boat. That's another thing that can shake off, shake loose, and cause problems later. I have the bearing here that we oiled, and it's been sitting in there, letting that oil kind of seep through. That goes on next. Our cover is the next piece in. All right, we're going to just tighten this down. Next up, two more to go, and we'll be able to give it a test, see how it's driving. So if you have a reel like Rennie that needs to be serviced and you're not up for doing it yourself, if you send me an email to the email address on the business card that follows, I'll be happy to provide you with reel repair information. I do it by mail, and I'll be happy to work on your reel if you're not interested in doing it yourself. All right, we're going to put the main handle back on. We can give it a test right now. That's a nice smooth operating reel again. Got a little stuck before, but that's okay. Last thing we want to do on a service is check the status of the drag washers. This one's got all the original factory grease in it, so I'm going to guess that this hasn't been serviced. There should be a little prong you can pick out of here. And hold your finger on there so that you don't lose that spring. It is a spring, it's a 5-sided spring. And just clean that out. And we should see the HT100 drag system in here. And I'm suspecting that this will all be good. So up top we have the one washer, that's the HT100. And then we have the slammer drag system below. So this one's fine. Clean that up and get this one back in and go down to the other side for the slammer. And the slammer below has, well, 3 micro screws. So go ahead and grab that again. And you want to inspect these. You want to make sure that they're not broken, worn, or maybe glossed over, scarred, burned, if you will. Because if they are, you need to replace them. Okay, just checking the slammer drags. They're fine. Your drag system underneath here. You want to check the drag washers. Now you have the option of keeping these dry or of putting some dry grease on there. Just want to make sure that these are clean. And they are. So you have a drag washer first, and they act as keyed washers. They have those little prongs on them. Then you have the round one, which is going to seat the slammer feature. Click ratchet. And you have the top one. I'll apologize if it's getting hard to see in here. Kind of hard to do and work the camera at the same time. Okay, looks like I had another camera failure, but we just put the slammer drag on. We're tightening down the drag now. Make sure that it's holding well. It is. And then back your drags off if you're not using them. Give it a spin. Boy, it's one nice smooth reel. There you go. So that's it. That's your Penn Spinfisher. It's the version 5 of the reel. It's the 3500 reel. That's how you take it apart, you service it, and you get it back together and running. I hope you've enjoyed that. Please, everybody, stay safe, stay well, and stay watching. To everybody who's a first responder, thank you for everything that you do. Your efforts truly are appreciated. You are our hometown heroes. Thanks for keeping us safe during the pandemic. So this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.